It's time for the podcast, which is all about the world of marketing on television through TV shopping networks and infomercials. Are we on the air? I'm your host, Sean Wilsey, and for over 29 years, I've hosted shows on cable shopping networks, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in sales. And now I want to be your guide into this world, explaining how it works, why it works, what doesn't work, and introduce you to the people who are making it the success that it is today. You've heard us talk about QVC's reign over the television shopping industry in the 1990s, and you know the origins of televised shopping trace back to the 1970s with the Home Shopping Network. Well, today we're diving into a lesser-known chapter of the story, the rise and fall of the powerhouse that ruled the late 1980s, broadcasting out of Minneapolis. It was called CVN, the Cable Value Network. Before QVC took over, CVN was the dominant force in home shopping, shaping the industry in ways you might not expect. So how did it rise to the top, and what led to its vanishing? Well, let's get into it with a man who was there at the beginning in 1986, Steve Sedahl. If Steve's name sounds familiar, well, it might. You might remember him from his appearance on a popular Comedy Central program in 2001, but we'll get into that in just a little bit. Steve, thanks for spending some time with me today.
Hey, Sean, it's great. Thanks for reaching out.
Well, because I realized that, I've been doing this 3-4 years now. We've talked QVC.
Yeah, I'm a big fan, too, by the way.
I appreciate that. And I've talked QVC so much and HSN, and I always make reference to the fact, and by the way, there was this network that was the dominant force in the late 80s, and you having been there since the start, having not been one of those that came from home shopping, and I talked to Bob Circosta about how they lost everybody to CVN back in the day. So I wanted to get your take on it, but before I talk about how you got into it, give me the story of how CVN even came to be, because television shopping was still in its infancy back then.
It started with Bob Johander, who was friends with Ted Deichel, who Ted Deichel owned the Comb Company, which was a huge closeout company. And they concocted this idea that they would be on television. And they put an ad in the Minneapolis paper. I responded to it. Turns out I was the third person hired.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Now, what were you doing at the time? Let's get your background. Because obviously had you ever seen television shopping? Did you know what it was?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
I knew what it was just because it was there. And well, I was teaching at the time. I was teaching radio, television broadcasting at a private school in Minneapolis. And when I saw this, I thought, well, hey, this seems like it's right up my alley. Because I've been a broadcaster. I was a broadcaster in the Army. I was a television reporter for the American Forces Network in the late 70s, early 80s. Did news in Fargo, North Dakota. Found myself in Minneapolis. Next thing you know, I'm at CVN.
When you saw the ad and you went in for, I'm assuming there was an audition. What was the audition like?
The audition was Bob Johander, who was a short guy. I was actually taller than Bob, which is, if you know me, I'm not that tall.
Right.
Anyway, but Bob said, hey, how are you? Nice to meet you. And he said, walk with me. And we started walking down the row of this warehouse, and he goes, what do you know about that? And it was a vacuum cleaner in a big box. And I thought, well, I know I can read the box, and that's what I did. I said, well, it's this, and it's got that, and it's this house park. Okay, great. What about that? And it was a stereo. Okay, tell him about that. He goes, come back at 6 o'clock and wear a suit.
Are you serious?
That was the beginning. And I met Mike Sullivan and Lisa Cherry, who were the two original hosts, and we just started playing.
You know, it's so fun. The first time I ever, just for anyone who doesn't know, again, we're talking about 1986. Cable television was still in its infancy. I think Minneapolis had been wired for cable for maybe 2 years at the time.
Right.
Many parts of the Twin Cities didn't even get CVN. You're broadcasting in the backyard, and I lived in the southern part. We didn't even get it at the time.
Right. Yeah. I'm not sure we did either initially, but it grew so quickly. I mean, it was just incredible. You know, we're starting there. We're making the rules because we didn't know. What do we know?
Right.
And then Bob Johander calls us all into the control room. This is about 2 weeks after I started. Calls us into this tiny control room in the back of the warehouse and puts it on speakerphone and says, great news. We've got new people coming. And he started rattling off this list. Dan Dennis, Bill Fahey, Karen Connolly, Skip Connolly, and the list went on. And then, of course, he ended up with, and finally, the Carmela Richards, the pièce de résistance, what do they call her? The Vanna White of home shopping.
Yep.
And anyway, then, I mean, the world changed after that.
I think it was Time
all the-
Magazine or one of those that coined that phrase for her. It was she
Yeah.
was the star at Home Shopping Network. She and Bob Circosta were the two big ones,
Right.
and so
Right.
that was a huge get, wasn't it?
Yeah, and for her especially, and everybody was so nice, and it's like, okay, Dan Dennis, I'll never forget. Where's the phone calls? It's like, Dan, we don't have a phone yet. Well, let's get one. So then I'll tell you what, Bob Johander went out to Radio Shack, bought a handful of earpieces with really long cords, and they strung them across the floor, and that's how we talked initially.
And for those that don't know Dan Dennis, that is a good impersonation of Dan Dennis. That's exactly how he would say it, absolutely. So, because back at Home Shopping, all these hosts that had come from Home Shopping, and I remember Carmela saying one of the things she loved about at CVN was that at Home Shopping, the host was tied to a desk. I mean, they were literally plugged into a desk and they never touched the product. At CVN, the host got very involved in the presentation of the product.
Right. Well, we were demoing everything, and the original CVN, I don't know if there's any footage of this, it was in the back of a warehouse up high, and so what the background was the warehouse. That was it. That was all we had until, we moved across the street into a bigger building, but that was the beginning.
So, yeah, I have seen footage of that somewhere. I think it's part of a news story. Channel 11 or one of them did back in the day. That does vaguely ring a bell. But the initial...
Well, what I did initially, Paul Waxlax, again, these names mean nothing to most people, but you know Paul.
Yes.
And so Paul was there. He goes, okay, we're going to call you a ferret, and you're going to ferret out the bargains. So that's what I did. I went out and I mean, we got creative. I got up on top of a huge rack, and then they were shooting me from the set. It was fantastic. We were just making stuff up.
You know what's so fun about this? This is going back to because it was still the Wild West at the time. And QVC, with all their success, and let's face it, very successful, that's the kind of thing that just wouldn't happen at a QVC. But it happened at a CVN. It used to happen, and I don't want to get too far down this road, in the early Value Vision days, which I think was part of the fun of being there in the early days when we can do things like that, because they didn't put handcuffs on you in the early part of CVN, did they?
No, not at all. And I mean, because nobody knew what was right and what was wrong, we just did what worked. Yeah. And we kept doing that until it stopped working, and then we did something else.
Yeah. There's video on my YouTube channel of Steve Sedahl in about, 30-minute segment, and in order, he sold a kitchen scale, went to a rose quartz necklace, then to a telescope, then to a gold chain. So it wasn't even segmented programming. It was just, here's what might sell, so let's get it on air.
Yeah, well, back in those days, gold was the go-to because, I mean, at that time, gold was selling for about $300 an ounce. Yeah, it's now about $3,000.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we were selling gold for $14.95 a gram.
Wow, that's hard to believe. That's true.
Yeah. Well, you remember those days.
Oh, I remember those days well.
Yeah. It was like I said, it was a fun time. Those guys, we lost a few along the way. Bill Fahey's passed away, and I know people know Bill.
Yeah, very well.
He was always just a joy. I did mornings with him. We ended up doing the morning show.
How did I not know that? That's interesting. I was never a morning person, so I guess I never saw that. I did not know that.
Yeah, we were, and it was fun. In those early days, I'd work on a Saturday, and I would sit in the producer's chair because we didn't have anybody. We had a small crew. We'd sit there, and I'd be in the control room at the producer's desk, which is right next to the director, and watching the computers and watching, money come in. Next thing you know, boy, what am I thinking of? Erwin Jacobs, who was a banker and also an investor in CVN. Next thing, he's sitting down next to me, and he goes, "Hi, how are you?" I said, "Good. Show me how much money we're making." And so that's what you do. That's all. That's what he wanted, and he would. I was there at 6 a.m. Saturday. He was there probably 6:30.
Didn't his wife have a collection?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, I can picture Countess Madeleine or something like that.
Yeah, that's it. You're right.
Yes.
Boy, that's good.
My gosh, I don't know where I just pulled that from, but it was a big CZ jewelry and just sold like crazy. I think we continued that for a while at Value Vision. That's why I remember that. So in this era, we're talking again, 86, 87, still kind of the Wild West. you were competing against, and I've got a list here I'm just going to read off. Also operating at that time, Telshop, Sky Merchant, Consumer Discount Network, Video Shopping Mall. QVC was just getting warmed up. They weren't even 24 hours a day yet. So there were all of these other networks that were trying to do what CVN and Home Shopping Club, as it was called at the time, were doing. What made CVN successful that didn't work for the Telshops and the Sky Merchants and the Consumer Discount Networks of the world?
A few things. I think money was one, because they had a lot of money. And two, they just kept growing, kept pushing out and getting more cable homes. It's all about eyeballs,
Yeah. So,
and I think the way we did things too was a little bit different. Like HSN, they were glued to a desk. QVC, not a factor at that point. We were just, we had people like, Mark Brown and Dan Dennis and Bill Fahey and Karen Connolly, Skip Connolly, all of these folks who were really, really good at what they did, transferred that I'm no longer chained to a desk to I can be a personality. That's what worked.
What makes a good host?
Knowledge in the product, but also it's a personality thing. It's a connection with the audience. You got to feel that, and I think most people that are in this industry do.
I've always felt there's an X factor, and I think you just nailed it. It's a personality, that there's something that you can't describe. You see it, you know it. Bob saw it in you. I hope he saw it in me. Frank Keenan was a big part of my success, and
Frank was great.
He was fantastic. And so there's that ability that a good host, manager, or boss, or president, whatever, has to recognize talent in someone and see it to the second they know that they have it. Did you have a sales background? You obviously had broadcasting, but did you have sales?
Does doing the Jerry Lewis telethon count?
I love that clip. Steve just sent me this. That it's on YouTube. Yes, that's you. Now I got to ask, because again, go and I'll link it in the show notes too. Explain this clip that you sent me the other night.
It's Jerry Lewis and me, and I was working TV in Fargo, North Dakota. They picked me to do the Jerry Lewis telethon. As part of that, we got sent out to Los Angeles, where we got to train and ultimately do a promo with Jerry sitting next to him. That's where that came from, and it was a terrifying 30 seconds.
It was, and Steve doesn't look like Steve as I've known him for 30, 40 years, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is just facially you were so different with the beard and everything, and there was it. I think might be the only time I ever saw a little bit of trepidation and nervousness in you.
Yes, that's very true. Yeah, it was terrifying.
Did you work with, I'm kind of jumping ahead, but in your time at CVN, did you work with some other famous people? This was obviously Jerry Lewis was not CVN, but getting back to CVN, were there some famous people you worked with?
Well, early on, it was Richard Simmons. And
really?
Yeah. He was, I think, one of the first live guests, and he was a ball of fire, and he'd come into the building, and there's TV going on in the control room, and all of a sudden Richard's in the phone room, which at that time was right behind us, and you could hear the noise, and Richard was going through the phone room, talking to people, picking up the phone, come into the control room, hugged all of us, went into the studio, and all of a sudden, magic, there he was on TV selling stuff.
Oh my gosh.
That was fun. That was a blast.
That had to be one of the first, because the HSN, I'm not even sure, was doing guests at the time. So that had to be one of the first little tests of having a celebrity guest on.
Right. Oh, absolutely. And it worked, and so they kept coming. And the mega memory guy, you remember him? He's in prison now.
I can picture him. Yes. Oh, Trudeau, Kevin Trudeau. Yes,
Kevin Trudeau. Yeah, I got to work with him a bunch. Again, there were. It was Lyle Wagner from the Carol Burnett Show.
Wow,
he was selling a breath mint, believe it or not, that you would take. It wasn't a candy. It was something you swallowed.
Right.
But that's what it was. It was a breath mint that would last forever. That was Lyle Wagner. Yeah, absolutely.
I got to look that one up. That's a new one to me. I can't imagine that. So as CVN's going along, that's just wild, and it's gaining some traction. And at one point, because you had to start into this thinking, okay, hey, you know what, nice gig, we'll see what happens. But there had to be a point where you said, oh my God, this company's really working. We're being very successful. Was there a moment when you just said, holy yes, this is taking off?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was once all HSN people came and got settled. We got into a new studio, top of the line equipment, great control room, and his name. I can't remember anybody's name these days, but he was the president, and he was a little spitfire as well, just super energetic, and I think it just rolled in. We just picked up on the energy.
Yeah.
And then one night, we get this call about 7:00. It was a Sunday night, I remember. And we got called to go to this restaurant, all the hosts, because there was talk of either an acquisition or a merger. And that's when the first QVC talk started.
I was going to get to that, but since you brought that up, yeah, because I remember vividly once the Minneapolis newspaper picked up on the story, I thought this can't be happening, because QVC at the time, they were pretty much a distant third, weren't they?
Right. And we didn't see them as competition, quite frankly. HSN was competition, but we didn't see QVC as a threat of anything.
Yeah. How did people react to that?
To the change?
No, to the possible acquisition. Were people just kind of brushing it off like, that's never going to happen, or did they take it seriously?
Oh, they took it seriously. People were scared. Am I going to lose my job? What's going to happen?
Yeah.
And then it turns out it didn't happen at that point. It did further down the road. And then people had to choose either to, take the buyout or move to Philadelphia if they were chosen. Not everybody was picked.
Were there people that were picked that turned it down, to your knowledge?
Bill Fahey, for one.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he didn't want to go.
Interesting.
He had kids in school and, married and all that. And yeah.
I did not know that. I guess in a way it doesn't surprise me, considering that he had already been established there. And didn't he wind up going to Shop at Home at one point, though?
Did he go to Shop at Home?
I feel like he did. Maybe not. Skip Conley. He went to Shop at Home. Maybe that's what
Oh, yeah, he did. Yeah. Skip. I had a blast on the air with Skip. He was always I don't know. He just, how some people you just connect with.
Yep.
On the air.
Yep.
That's what it was with Shannon Smith and me.
Yep.
She's the best broadcast partner I've ever had.
Yep. You two were gold. It was. We're into the Value Vision days now, which I'm going to get to because that.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't mean to jump around.
No, that's fine. It's just it's a little tease for something that we're going to get to in a little bit here. But since we were talking about the QVC era, because CVN had been going along, great guns, had been doing very well, and for those that don't know, there was what turned out to be a hostile takeover, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah, and it kind of came out of the blue. I left about 3 months before that all went down.
Mm-hmm.
I left on my own, and it was like, holy crap, that's crazy, because everybody would, I was still in touch with everybody, but yeah, that was a scary moment or two.
So what QVC did is, because for a while, because I remember watching, and for a while, they owned CVN, and they were operating it, because you could see the on-air look changed dramatically. It was like overnight. Mm-hmm. It was like you were watching a different network.
Right. And they shut down, they started by shutting down the clothing channel. I forget what that was called.
Oh, the fashion channel. I forgot all about that. Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, that was the first one to go. And then everything started to fall from there.
And so I know they took Mary Beth because from the way the story's been told to me, when the switch was flipped, let's just call it, she was the first face for the homes that still had CVN. Because I remember in Minneapolis, they went to QVC before CVN was actually off the air.
Huh.
Yeah, I think some of the contracts were up or whatever, and so we never actually saw the last day of CVN in Minneapolis because they'd already gone to QVC. But the way the story's always been told to me is Mary Beth was the first face when CVN was officially closed down, and that they had told, I think Karen and Carmel have each told me this, they had told all the hosts, hey, show up for the last hour or whatever of CVN, everybody's going to get a chance to say goodbye, and the QVC people said, no, sorry, that's not happening, and went to Mary Beth right away.
Yeah, I heard that story too. It's you got to wonder sometimes, you know, the decisions that were made.
Yeah. When you look back on the CVN time, we'll get to Value Vision in a second here. Then I also want to talk about Let's Bowl. There had to be, because everybody's seen the Harold and Karen blooper a zillion times with the ladder. What was the Steve Sedahl moment that rivals that?
Can I be a little graphic?
You can. If I have to cut, I'll cut. But yes,
okay,
please
well,
tell the story.
Selling a piece of gold necklace, 1/4 inch herringbone, beautiful, probably about 15 grams, so pretty good size. And I got a phone call, and this was early days, no filters.
Oh no, this can't be good already.
And she was. I said, so you got the gold necklace? Is that for you? She said, yeah, and I want to wrap it around your. All I said was thanks.
Oh my Lord.
And obviously we hung up, but
yeah, of course.
That was mine.
Yeah, there have been situations I've had too.
You got a lot, Sean.
Oh, I must have the record at Value Vision. I
think you do.
It was so bad. I think someone told me once they heard one of mine on Howard Stern, so I at least I have that.
That is a level of that's an accomplishment.
One of the Baba Booey calls back when that was a thing. But no, there was for a long time there was no delay, and so things like that would happen. It's they would go out and that's it. That's that. So that. But after you left CVN, before Value Vision started up, there had to be a period of about 3-4 years. What were you doing in that time?
Well, when I left CVN, I went to my hometown, Brainerd, Minnesota, and I worked I kind of ran a radio station for a couple of years, and then Value Vision came calling.
Mm-hmm. Explain how that one started up.
Well, that started as a local broadcast in, they had the old PBS studios in St. Paul. That's where they were broadcasting from, and it was only local, and it was just a few hours. And then they bought a low-power TV station. I'm saying Bob Johander, and at that point, Nick Jaksich was also involved. But Bob had the idea of taking low-power TV stations around the country and broadcasting Value Vision. Mm-hmm. I mean, again, the only cost was the cost to buy the channel, which at that time wasn't very much. And that was Bob's vision, to build a network of low-power, essentially TV stations.
I hope people realize how everything old is new again, because now with all the cord cutting, that's the success of, well, for instance, ShopLC. We have a lot of these 17.3 stations around the country, and that's the trend now.
Isn't that funny?
I know.
Yeah, Bob was a visionary. There's no question.
So, because I remember the local days. It was in Minneapolis, Channel 7, Channel 62. And I don't know if you remember this. This just dawned on me. We actually were a reference on Mystery Science Theater at one point.
No kidding.
One of the movies, and I wish I could remember it, but it was some astronauts in a spaceship, and the picture that the astronauts were looking at was very blurry. And Joel Hodgson says, "Looks like Value Vision." Because
well, one of the guys on Mystery Science, Tim Scott,
right,
was also one of the original hires at CVN. That's where I met Tim, and I met a bunch of good folks that way, and so then it was. Yeah, that's probably why it ended up in Mystery Science Theater.
Yeah, because our picture was awful throughout most of a good part of Minneapolis, because it was very staticky, but it worked, and
It worked. Can I add one other piece here?
Please do.
I don't think anybody knows this, remembers this, but we were doing Value Vision, doing the local thing, and
it was on Channel 23 for originally when you were doing just
this was on 762, but also we were buying block time on satellites.
Oh.
Right. Just like block time on radio, I had the same thing on satellites. The channels weren't always used. So we were on a particular satellite, and it was New Year's Eve, and we shut off at midnight Central. And so then, that's when our satellite time ended. Well, the Playboy channel took over at that point for the rest of the night. We didn't have any control over that.
Right.
But the next morning, we go back on the air at 6. Somebody forgot to flip the switch on that satellite. We ended up going out and in Chicago on Chicago cable systems and couldn't figure out. I remember Bob Johander came in that morning. I was working, and he goes, "What the heck is going on? Why do we have all these calls from Chicago? People are buying stuff in Chicago." He traced it back, figured out it was by accident.
Wow.
And then they rolled it out. So, all right, we're buying as much time as we can.
Now,
that was how it happened.
I did not know that story, but some pieces of the puzzle are starting to come together because, again, for those that don't understand, in the early days of the industry, again, in the HSN and CVN days, the way cable systems got paid was, by and large, they got a small percentage of whatever sales were generated by the customers. And you would get more, like, I'm just making this number up, 5% maybe. If you only had CVN as opposed to if you had CVN and home shopping, then maybe you got 2%. So whatever. So that is a game changer then, going in and saying, wait a minute, rather than pay the cable systems a percent, we just buy the time. Man, visionary,
Yes.
You are right, Steve.
Yeah. Yep. And it worked. And we started growing.
Oh my, I didn't. That's fascinating because, again, at the time it was low power stations. And so that explains how the cable growth came to be. I got to back up to one thing you said, though, because, again, the parallels are not lost on me. When we started Value Vision, we were on a mezzanine overlooking the warehouse. So it sounds very similar to the way CVN started.
It was exactly the same way, and that's what Bob Johander wanted.
Oh my God.
I want it to look like that.
That is so wild.
And it used to be, well, you remember where that was. It was in Edina.
Yeah.
And one of the VPs used to call it the dry cleaning store.
Yes. Yes, he did. I remember him well. And so as Value Vision started to take off, I always look at it. My favorite era is probably just those earliest days because there was such a can-do attitude. And I've now built a couple networks up because I was at ShopLC in the early days now, and so I watched the same thing happen there where I remember we would have camera operators who would do their shift and then go into the warehouse and pick product. It was just, if the phone room got busy, literally executives would get on the phones to answer phone calls.
Yep. Yeah, those days, I mean, that was Wild West too. And I remember when you were there. I remember when you started, and it was just everybody. You're right. It was a giant team that actually liked each other.
Yes. I'm so glad you said that because that honestly, that's not a facetious statement by any means on Steve's part. It's just there is, I don't want to say there's a lot of distrust or dislike these days in the industry, but I feel like there was a totally different attitude. Everyone, I will remember vividly if I did the midnight show, because we went to tape at midnight or 1 a.m., whatever it was.
Yeah.
Everyone would go. There was a TGI Fridays over by the Radisson. We'd all go over there. We'd sit. We'd have drinks. We'd laugh together and have fun. And I honestly don't think I've had that happen in 25 years. It was just
me either.
There's something about the camaraderie back then.
Sure. I mean, when the director and camera people and stylists and everybody was the same. It wasn't, you know what I mean? It was there weren't a lot of egos.
Right.
I'll say that.
I think, yeah, it's perfectly put because when Value Vision started evolving, it became ShopNBC and all these other things, I don't know. I just feel like I was never connecting. I was never buddy-buddy with most of the hosts there, and so they were off doing their own thing. But I still would hang with production. I'd hang with the producers. Those were the people I always felt a camaraderie with.
Right. Oh, yeah, me too. And I mean, the directors were great. Greg Chose is another name that some people will know, but I mean, he was fantastic. Yeah. He was the only director that could successfully tell me a joke while I'm on the air and not have me laugh.
Yes. Yeah. Always the goal of anyone in production, make their talent break up and lose it on air. They feel like they've hit a grand slam home run if they're able to do that. So that is always a big score for them. If you've got good talent, it's not easy to do. We're going to continue with Steve on the next podcast. Check out his Financial Pizza podcast, by the way, the link to that is in the show notes. So go there and check that out. Make sure you subscribe to Steve's podcast as well. Obviously, next show we're going to talk about Let's Bowl, but there's still more shopping networks Steve was involved with to discuss on the next show. So please subscribe wherever you get your podcast to this one so you never miss a show. Plus, you can listen to the archive of past shows. I hope you'll check me out on X, Facebook, all the social media, YouTube, Sean Wilsey, and on Instagram at SWilsey. On my YouTube, I do have some clips of Steve Sedahl, by the way, doing CVN. Thank you for downloading this edition of Are We on the Air?
Yes, I know, Travis. That's why we give such bargains.
Copyright 2025 King Bobby Productions, all rights reserved.